just have to ask, Jonathan, what's the subscription bill at Glen Howells for all those bits of kit?
It's not cheap. The Reeve recommend 6 to 7% of you should be spending on IT. We're probably 7 to 8%. We do spend a lot. We have invested heavily in cloud infrastructure. When I joined GHA, we needed to be brought into the 21st century. We needed to get our infrastructure in place. We needed to make sure connectivity was great. We needed to make sure it was resilient, and we needed to make sure we had all of the tools to provide these to the architects. So I can't say exactly. We've spent a hell of a lot of money. It's probably the largest budget I've dealt with.
Right. Okay. Kathryn, if you could just tell us a little bit about your role and some of the things that you're working on with Hammerson, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm head of customer experience at Hammerson, very focused on the consumer within our destinations. So we own places like Bullring in Birmingham, Brent Cross in London, and those are big, massive scale retail and leisure destinations. So we really need to think about the experience of those consumers in those spaces. Tech's a big part of my role and my background, so looking at how those consumers engage with digital and how that augments the experience. So it might be looking at things like how we engage customers through things like apps, and we have a great beacon infrastructure within our centres that allows us to personalise the content, offers and information we give customers in that space, but also gives us a ton of data and insight around what consumers are doing, so where they visit, and what they do while they're in our centres. We're doing lots of stuff around AI technology, so looking at how we improve customer service, whether that's kind of chatbots, but actually also in the more kind of fun and engaging sense. So, we've developed tools like Style Seeker, which is a visual search app that allows you to take a picture of an item of clothing. So I might, I'm sitting with a load of men in shirts and jumpers, but you might like my blouse. You'd be able to take a picture, it would show you items that are similar from retailers within that centre. So there's some really interesting uses at tech that kind of help improve that experience. So lots of exciting things going on.
Fantastic. And Robbie, tell us a little bit about some of the work that Mills and Reeve's been doing to sort of update the work of the real estate lawyer and clients.
Yeah, sure. So lawyers are always late to the party with these things and adopting new technologies. So it's really just in its infancy at the moment. But we are starting to use AI for improving service to clients. So looking at, say, a typical property transaction, you might be acting on a big corporate transaction which involves multiple properties, or someone who's looking to buy an investment portfolio, and you need, if each of those properties has got a lease in place and they all need to be sort of collated together and reported on the client, we can use sort of technologies to sort of extract all the data from those leases and then prepare a sort of template report for a client, and then it helps the lawyer then just sort of concentrate on the proper job of advising on risks and all that sort of thing, and saves a lot of time and money for the client in the long term. So.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've covered a lot of on PlaceTech is writing about the sort of B2B to C sort of, the move. We've heard a lot of mention of consumers and people in cities, and how this the sort of shared experiences are so important nowadays. Are those old definitions still relevant to B2B and B2C? Are we seeing sort of doing away with that? Any thoughts around how that's changing?
I certainly think, I think it's blurring, definitely. I think it's still relevant, and it's helpful. I do sit within marketing, interestingly, so, we talk about those different kind of customers a lot, but it's blurring, and actually this idea that technology is becoming, more multi-purpose. IT is a great example of that, where, you've got smart lighting that's not just, providing a better environment, but it's collecting data, it's feeding to other things. So, I don't think it's ever as kind of black and white as that, well, certainly for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions from the audience before we go to Slido? Anybody want to put their hand up and put a question to any of the panel? Feel free at any time. Yeah, there's one gentleman towards the front. We've got a roaming mic coming if you want to.
Hello.
Do you want to say who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, my name's Bill Hoole. I'm a property developer from Birmingham, but I also represent a Chinese investment house buying property over here. And I'm also tied to a Finnish IT company specializing in the property sector, bearing in mind that the Finns are probably 10 years ahead of us in terms of where they are with their general technology. The issue we have in a really big way in this country is about getting our construction costs down and building effective residential property, whether it's apartments or housing. So there's two questions I've asked. One of Jill of Willmott Dixon, of whom I'm a huge fan of Willmott Dixon because of their technology stuff, and the other one for Graeme Scott. And
they don't happen to be the same questions that are on Slido.
They are, yeah.
Right, okay.
But putting them
choose your medium.
yeah, well, it's better to talk. But the question really putting those two together is, how do we solve our infrastructure problems, like all these electric cars, but no power to actually run them in the cities? And how do we get our build costs down to the sort of levels that it costs to build a house in Europe or America, say? You know, because it's virtually double the cost to build the same thing here for no particular reason except for our antiquated systems.
Okay, we'll take energy and energy infrastructure in cities. It's obviously a big part of development. To open up a development site, you've got to get power in.
Okay. There's a few things. I think the first one I would make, or the first point I'd make, is it should be properly joined up policy, and that doesn't seem to be the case. There's a lot of policy on decarbonisation of transport, and again, there's various options, and electric being one of the primary means of doing that. The automotive industry investing huge amounts, but then the policy to allow, say, the power companies to invest in putting all the right infrastructure in isn't quite there yet. So again, having that joined up approach, if you want to really move into, let's say, decarbonising the vehicle fleet, what are the ways of doing it? How can you facilitate that? That would be a big thing. I know in a Scottish perspective, I'm not sure if it's the same legislation here, but talking to people that were with Scottish Power, they have plans that they can increase the amount of power available through the grid from renewable sources, which again is a big thing in Scotland. The Scottish Government, I think, have almost the most ambitious climate change targets, and certainly for decarbonising the fleet that I know of. And they want to invest and put all this infrastructure in because they know the demand is coming, but they're not allowed to do so because they need to make a certain investment case for it. And I don't know the specifics, but they weren't able to do it. So they're wanting to do it, but the restrictions that they're placed under won't allow them to. Now, there's it might drive other changes. I talked a lot about sharing. It may be that electric vehicles, there'll be on-street infrastructure, but it may be that you can't charge, there won't be charging places everywhere. So whether it's more community vehicles that are electric, whether there's charging in those kind of communal points or active travel hubs or mobility hubs. I know the range of electric vehicles is increasing all the time. For those that have driven them in the last few years, you would typically expect about 100-mile range in a full charge. That might go down in the winter if you're putting heating on or whatever. But that's a lot of the advances in battery technology is changing it. So it might not need a lot of time between charges. Or, you know, it could be a week, 2 weeks between charges. Look at the typical journeys that have been made on a daily basis. You know, you might only be 10 miles into the city or out, so you could charge it at home or charge it when you go to some of those, maybe a commercial place or a car park. You might be able to take advantage of it there. But in terms of putting that infrastructure in, it needs some real long-term planning and joined-up policy to allow it to take place.
And Jill, anything you can tell us about the actual cost savings of implementing some of these initiatives?
I think I haven't got any hard facts for you right now, but I think probably time is the biggest saving. we're so much better at designing buildings now because we've got all of this incredible software that helps us do it better, which means we can do it in a shorter time frame, so our programs are reducing and we can give that back to our customers. We're not now missing handover dates, not that we ever did, but just clarify that. However, we've got all of this technology now where we're smarter, we're quicker, and we can offer that savings back to customers. Even that saving I showed earlier of the 8-week for doing a takeoff, when you think about that over during the stage 3, we've saved 8 weeks, stage 4 saved another 8 weeks. Then we're attaching those models to the program, we're reducing that program more and more, the better we get. So yeah, I'd like to give you some better facts, but I would say time is definitely the biggest.
Jonathan, you're nodding along there.
Time is key for us as well. It's just the saving of time to allow us to spend more time. For an architect, for all the best will in the world, if you give him 4 weeks and he's got the design done in 2 weeks, he's probably still going to carry on design until the 4 weeks are up. So in an ideal world, we take that 2 weeks and we do something more productive, but reality is we probably spend more time refining the design. But yeah, it's clearly time.
And Kathryn, this is some of the stuff you're still sort of is ongoing, trialing. Are there any results coming back, any early findings from some of the initiatives that you can share, some of the sort of metrics with us?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're much more focused on the retail, or I am on the retail technology side than kind of the kind of construction or development side. But yeah, we're seeing some really positive results, and definitely, the one thing I would say is this importance of data and understanding what customers are doing in that space. That is driving some really good results. So, if we're able to offer a kind of more relevant and targeted experience, then if it's me, we're seeing that is actually benefiting in terms of dwell in our venues. Things like frequency of visits. So, we've done some really interesting trials and tests with beacon technology, and that, when we're offering that really relevant, targeted, piece of content, whether it's an offer or whatever, if that's based on the location of where I am in the centre, my preferences, so where I've been before, what I've shot, what I like, that has a huge impact on frequency of visit, as an example. So some trials with Top Shot, we saw frequency of visit go up 137%, versus our control group. So some really quite exciting, benefits around being able to influence behaviour.
Yeah, okay. And question for any of the panelists in terms of what do you find when you're going to the bosses, to the board with making the case for some new bit of kit or trial? What's the most effective way of getting that through and getting the green tick that you want to get the adoption within the company?
I think in architecture, we're a member of an IT leaders group, which is made up of some of the largest practices in the UK: Foster's, Grimshaw, Shipper Robson, Scott Brownrigg, Rogers, etc., etc. So we meet on a quarterly basis and we share ideas, we share what we're doing as a practice. We're all doing similar things. We're all using similar technology. Glen Howells would like to know what some of the others are doing. What are AHMM doing? If they're doing it, then as long as we can show some form of return on investment or some form of benefit to the architects, then yes, we'll probably get an investment in that, unless it's astronomical. But everything we've done in the last 3 or 4 years has been very, very similar to the other practices. So unless you're Foster's, unless you're massive and you've got millions to spend, you're not going to be going and doing really unique kind of projects. We're all doing very, very similar. So Glen and our board are receptive to what the other practices are doing. So it's kind of what are our peers doing. Yeah. We're all doing the same stuff. Yeah.
It's good to hear there's some open collaboration. It's something we hear a lot about.
Probably the most collaborative environment I've ever worked in. We compete on creativity. We don't compete on technology.
Yeah. Jill, looking at the dozen or so initiatives that have been picked up in the Eureka Fund, is there something that seems to excite the board, or is it a very random mix?
I think the good thing about the Eureka Fund is that we have to solve a problem. So it's not about just bringing in some fancy tech because we want to have a play with it. We have to solve a problem with it. And I think another good example of that is for whatever reason, we always have difficulties with mechanical, electrical information, particularly with our customers when we hand the building over. They have no idea how they're going to manage that building. And this was actually an initiative that Chris came up with, where we need to be walking all of our customers around the building, specifically looking at the M&E. And when we hand buildings over now, customers are really well informed about what's in there. And that's, it's just a really small thing, but the impact is huge for our customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're so spot on around, you've got to start with either a customer kind of issue or a business need, and it shouldn't be about, tech for tech's sake. I think the other thing to kind of answer the earlier question about how you get buy-in, for us, it's been about not spending huge amounts of money, actually really focusing on what is the thing that we're trying to achieve, how in a really low-cost, agile way do we test that, whether that's prototyping or just getting out and speaking to customers as an example. Start with that, because that's what helps you build the business case. And actually, that isn't, I think, a very common approach in property, I'm not from property, my background's retail. It's much more common in industries like retail, where they're used to that agile development, they're used to testing and learning and R&D, but it's great to see that is starting to happen more within our industry, and certainly for us, that approach of low cost, agile MVP, so get to the minimal viable product. What are you really trying to achieve? How do you test that in, with spending as little as possible, and then go from there in terms of piloting and actually, I think from a scaling perspective, it makes it much easier then to kind of scale beyond that.
And not everything works when you're experimenting. There must be examples of failures that you'd be more than happy to share with us on stage. Anybody?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'll share failures, but I think it is collaboration is the big thing, and prototyping, and proof of concept, and prove you can do these things. I think there's a couple of things, like from the IBI example that we'll give. One is that we have a kind of incubator, a sandbox space set up, that we're working with a combination of, I guess, partners that we'd normally have. So it's like a couple of developers, contractors, but we've got others in there like Microsoft, other tech partners, and we can bring other like startups or SMEs in that we can try to develop. It gives a space that we can work together. I think it recognises that a lot of the kind of startups, it comes back to the comments about the gaming kind of community. There's a lot more people out there that are learning coding, or learning language, just want to try things. They've got the capability to do it. We could do it ourselves, but we would probably end up taking a kind of corporate approach. It would cost us far more, and maybe 2 years down the line, and we wouldn't have anything as good as these guys have got just now. So partner with them, collaborate, see what they've got. We understand maybe the business use of the application, and we can take that forward. The other example to that is just about prototyping, and it comes back to what you're saying you've been doing with your own internal scheme. We had a hackathon internally around the entire company last month. I think we had about 20% of the company took part in it, which I thought was fascinating to do that. Now, I'd mentored a lot of the teams in advance of it. We were looking at not just the idea, but think about where the business application might be. It's not just technology for technology's sake, but there's some good ideas there. But how can you use these things? How can you help teach people about, where might the revenue opportunities be? How might it work in the business? But just try and capture those ideas. Some of them on the surface look dreadful, but there's always something from that. You could learn from it. And whether it's a prototyping, you might say, actually, this might work. An example, not necessarily failure, but how it's gone in a different direction. One of the slides he used was the autonomous vehicles being used in Australia and New Zealand. And the company set up a whole team. It was primarily to focus on getting this software in for the autonomous vehicle. But they ended up with 3 different applications from the systems and the technology that they didn't originally think they would get. But just, they needed to look at measuring identify what's happening on the road. So they now have a defect detection system using the same technology. And there's other things like that. Just by trialing it and keeping an open mind, you don't know what you'll come up with.
You mentioned the hackathon. Mills and Reeve did a hackathon at the end of...
We did, yeah. And I think with all these things, you have to be prepared to fail before you come up with the right solution. And yeah, as you say, we did a hackathon as part of our sort of annual innovation week earlier in the year, and some really good ideas came out of that. And it's not a bit about massive game-changing ideas. It can be just a small thing that can just help prevent friction in one particular area and make us more efficient. And it's this competitive world out there for legal services, and anything we can do to sort of, move with the times and keep up and make us, a service better and cheaper for clients, the better, really. So.
Absolutely. Any other questions? We've got time for one or two more from the floor before we wrap up. I just wanted to pick up on the skills issue, which has come up on one of the questions, but also goes back to the changing role as well. There's different ways that tech can affect skills and the workforce. You talk about people coming from a gaming background into architecture in the future, which is a fascinating idea. Any thoughts about how tech is changing the working life of people in property, and whether it can sort of open it up to more diversity, or will there be closing of skills gaps because of efficiencies from tech? Skills discussed, basically. So.
I think one of the things that I feel like I'm just saying how great we are, but we spend so much time in schools. It's really important to the business, and it's really sad sometimes that we sponsored a hackathon recently, and we went with lots of data, and we asked the kids, we're working on this project, and they were just not interested whatsoever, and they've got the skills that we need, and they just don't find construction interesting. So we go into schools and we show them some of the exciting stuff, and they can kind of then start to see how it relates to the industry. But in terms of the skills gap, I'd like to say that it is going to help, but I'm not so sure, because construction is seen as a bit of a dirty, wet, being out on site covered in mud job. I mean, when I go into schools, people don't believe, or kids do not believe, I work in construction. And it's trying to, hopefully tech will change that mindset, and we need them. We desperately need them in the industry.
You need to splash some mud on your face.
Yeah, put some dirty boots on.
Anybody else, any thoughts on skills and tech?
I mean, it's definitely a challenge, I think, to attract the right people. And it's great now that in education you've got coding clubs, and schools trying to do a lot more to fill those gaps. For us, we recognise as a property company, a landlord, we're probably not going to be able to track the people with those skills. So our approach is to work with really great providers. So, we outsource a lot of that, and we've got some amazing kind of tech partners we work with who probably provide the right environment to kind of foster that. And, having some of the challenges that construction has, property's not seen as a very tech-led, sexy industry. So certainly that's the way we do it. And I think, from our perspective, that works well, having kind of trusted, really great partners and building those partnerships, so we can kind of benefit from that.
I think you said it there just about coding clubs, and that's something that there really needs to be huge focus on. I think it was Tim Cook from Apple, or as Donald Trump called him the other day, Tim Apple, which is another quality one. He gave a lecture last year, and I heard a few others similar, and saying coding should be the second language that every person learns. So it's not French, German, whatever, it's coding. So that needs to be really brought into the whole education process from day one, possibly even before. Get people to understand what it means to code, because that was going to go through everything. On a related element, not to kind of put a scary element onto it, but there's all the element of AI coming in, and again, it's all technology, and the number of jobs that will be lost and won't be automatically replaced. So there's a whole transformation there, and it's a huge figure. It's millions of jobs will be lost, and it's not the kind of lower end as well. It's the kind of medium, top-level professional jobs. Could be in architecture, could be in engineering. What you would do, those designs will be replaced by technology and AI. So how do you go over that? And it's looking at, again, it comes back to from a very young age, how do you start to teach people to code? And then for those that would be in that transition period, how do you bring them along as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that bombshell, on that big question, which we can pick up over lunch, if you join me in thanking our panelists again, thank you.